Welcome to the Curious Humans podcast, Khe.
Thank you, my friend, my surfing buddy, my the reason Instagram was worth it for me. I'm honored to be here.
Maybe that should be our starting point. But it's so great to have you here. I feel like we should have had this conversation like years ago. But I'm glad it's happening now. Why did I make Instagram worth it for you?
So we met right when stories came out. So this is like
Yes,
2016.
it's like a long time ago.
And I think you were following my newsletter and you were posting stories of you surfing. And I was like, dope, man, cool. And you're like, hey, nice to meet you. Like, are you surfing soon? And we just kind of had that exchange for a handful of years. And then our worlds kind of reunited in kind of a spiritual slash course creator slash Twitter world. Like it kind of like I always felt like there were two different worlds that we were hanging out with, and then they met on Twitter again.
Totally. Yeah.
And then a couple years after we met in person at a mastermind for online entrepreneurs. So yeah, three chapters of crisscrossing paths. But really, like the beauty, like social media gets a really bad rap. It's like, oh, it's all these narcissists, or it's killing your brains, or this or that. But I'm like, look at how organic. Like we almost have like three chapters of friendship across three different, multiple different mediums. Totally organic, no peacocking, nothing. Like really finding each other at like in our everydayness.
Yeah, I so agree. I mean, I feel like some of my closest friends I've been connected to them through Twitter mostly,
Yeah, same here.
and some Instagram as well. And so, whilst it can be a real drain and life suck if you don't kind of use it intentionally, I'm so grateful for it. It's been amazing. Well, I want to ask you this question because I ask all my guests this question, and I actually want to hear your answer. So, do you consider yourself to have been an exceptionally curious child? And if so, could you tell me something that you might have been curious about?
You know, Someone was asking me earlier, where did you become so introspective? And I said, I don't really know because, my parents were immigrants. They came to New York. They didn't know many people. They didn't have any family. They didn't know anyone. And so it's kind of not a fertile ground for curiosity. I don't want to say it was survival because they had jobs. So it wasn't a concern about putting food on the table.
Mm,
But there wasn't that spaciousness for curiosity.
mm,
That being said, as I say that, I'm just having flashback memories of my dad, this Cambodian man living in New York who was teaching himself colloquial English by reading the Playboy collection of jokes. So it's like he was reading dirty jokes to better understand American culture, right? And we were playing Michael Jackson Thriller nonstop. So maybe, who knows? So anyway, that sets a little bit of the stage. I wouldn't identify as I wouldn't call myself curious as a child. I would actually have used many more words like methodical
mhm,
or disciplined or
mhm,
serious or assiduous.
mm,
Those are probably more of the words that come to mind. But I do think that I was a little bit of a misfit of sorts
mm,
in that I was, I think that, I think my curiosity really was around like how the game of life is played. And what I mean by that is that, I think that this is a kind of classic entrepreneurial origin story, which I don't view this as my entrepreneurial origin story, but I was always trying to look around and ways to make money. So I do think that my curiosity and my creativity were always tied to making money.
mhm,
And so one of my earliest memories of money, we were in Pattaya in Thailand,
mm,
and there were all these hermit crabs. and I found these plastic bags, and I would just collect hermit crabs, and I would fill them up. And then I was 7, probably, maybe 9. And I remember going up to a Thai woman who was probably kind of selling fruit on the beach or something like that. And I go up to her, and you know, she doesn't speak English and I don't speak Thai. And I basically offered to sell her my bag of hermit crabs. And she gave me like a nice smile. Okay, kid. And then I walked a bit further, and then there was a European couple, and you know, do you want to buy my hermit crabs for, you know, 5 baht or whatever? And they kind of like, cute kid, thanks, but no thanks. And I could come up with countless stories from pre age 12 that had some flavor of that. So taking some kind of situation, the curiosity being, how do I make money from this situation? And then applying creativity and some of the other words that I use, assiduousness and methodicity, to make it happen.
Mm. I love that phrase, like how to win the game of life. And I wonder, how did your answer to that kind of lead, like how did that guide the first like 3 decades of your life? Like where did your attempt to answer that question lead you?
Money, power, and sex.
Great.
Or is that like there's that DMX song, money, cash, hose, money, cash, hose. So again, I think with someone like, I wouldn't go on any podcast and kind of split hairs on the stories I'm going to tell, but I feel like this is, if I'm going to do it, you know, I've been really thinking about, just a quick sidetrack, but I'll bring it back. Hassan Minhaj, the comedian, interviewed Barack Obama, multiple Netflix specials, Today Show. There just was an article that came out on him, and he has these amazing origin stories of getting like roughed up by the cops. He's a Muslim in New York City, getting roughed up by the cops after 9/11. This FBI informant that tried to infiltrate, you know, Pakistan, or he's Indian or Pakistani, kids playing basketball in the local gym and like roughing them up, being like, hey, are you part of a terrorist organization? And it basically came out that all those stories are made up.
Oh, wow.
And he defends them, being there was emotional resonance to them all. So like, and again, I haven't dug deep into the story, but it's made me really think about every story that I tell. That's like, what's the emotional truth? You know, it wasn't emotional resonance, emotional truth. I'm like, what's the emotional truth? And I am a decent storyteller. It's like, where have I added like padding to make everything fit? So I feel like with you, I could be like, I think this story's true, and this is what I'm going to try my best to. But I'm very hyper aware of it now. But okay, so back to the game, the winning the game of life, money, power, sex. This is the truth. Is I was awkward, skinny, nerdy. I was the nicest compliment that a woman would give me, a girl would give me at that time is, you're the kind of guy that everyone wants to be friends with, right? Like that's the worst. I mean, at 13, that's like a death sentence. Like you're never getting
relegated to friend zone.
Yes. So I think that much of that pursuit of winning the game of life was partially internalized by my parents, which was like, get a good education, get good grades, go to a good college, make good money, and you'll be happy. There was that path. And then there was this other path of like, living in New York City in the East Village in the 90s, where it's like, there's a lot of different paths to, you know, status and all those things. But I think I just, again, if you take that curiosity muscle, I think I had a really good knack at just being like, oh, if the point of this game is to make money, what's the fastest way to make money? And I remember like, Dad, teach me about stocks. He's like, they only go down. My dad is terrified of stocks to this day. And I'm like, I don't think that's true. And I'm like, how can I buy a stock? Where do I go? What book should I read? And this is pre-internet. So you're like going to bookstores to find books on stocks. And so I think that once you're like, oh, there was a strand to pull on, entrepreneurship, like, oh, I'm going to make web pages. And I was making web pages as a 16-year-old, charging $20 an hour in $1990 terms. So that's like $40 an hour.
That's legit.
Today's dollars cash. as a 16-year-old, and then taking my knowledge of the stock market and investing that money in stocks.
Nicely done.
So like, so again, I don't know, I don't know exactly where that came from, but I think it all felt like very natural to me, even though I didn't get the best grades. I was a valedictorian in high school, but like in college, I was very average college student grade wise. I didn't work at the elite banks that, the Goldmans and all that. I was at a second/slash third tier bank, but it always seemed very obvious to me, like what this looks like, where you want to be like 5 years ahead and what it takes to get there. And usually it's just some combination of like hard work and just channeling it into the right channels. And so I won't bore you with the details, but I think on Wall Street, it actually felt very obvious to me how to make a lot of money. And then, so that was one game, how to make a lot of money and get promoted. And then the other game is like, well, once you make all that money, like, what do you do with it? And investing it. And investing has always felt very easy to me because hand on my heart, all I do is buy the S&P 500 and never sell. So I've never, that's all I own. I have some other stuff, but 80% of what I own is the S&P 500. And those shares that 16-year-old kid bought with the web development money, I still own them. And so not only have they appreciated in value, I've never paid taxes on them.
Just haven't sold. Right.
I haven't sold them. So,
Right.
so it's almost like it almost felt like too easy to some extent. But then one of our mutual friends, and later in life, he said, the question that came up was like, are you playing the right game? Right? It's like games are great. Winning games is great. And I think often, on Wall Street, people love poker. Like this is just, I'm very bad at poker, but people love poker. It's like, I always wonder if you were a really good poker player, but you hated poker, should you play poker? Like it was almost this hypothetical I would always ask myself, because everyone's doing some version of that. There's something about poker that you either find it really sexy or really dirty. Like there's just kind of no like in between there. And it's just like, at what point do you opt out of a game when there's all these kind of additional layers of status, of money, and so on? So
Yeah.
long-winded story. But.
No, it's great. So I'm curious, like, what was it that shifted for you where you felt like you'd maybe like won that game of making money to a certain degree, or you'd realized that there were maybe other rules in the game of life that you hadn't been previously aware of, and that you wanted to shift because you made this big shift when you were, I guess, 35 -ish?
35, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so one was I had no control over my time. So you can have a big paycheck, and we were talking even with being a VC-backed founder, right? You don't own your time, right? You're responsible. You report to a board or investors or shareholders and so on.
Yep.
So one was just no agency about with my time, and really everything. And this is funny because I think your audience would just laugh at this, and my audience would be like, "Oh, that's cool." The last 8 years, I worked a solid 60 hours a week, which it was fixed. It was like 7 to 7, and that is considered pretty easy in Wall Street. And now I'm different. Now I'm like, can't be bothered to work some days. But until recently, I'm like, if you give me a 60-hour, and then the key was that it was predictable, which is like once you left, you were pretty much done working. Whereas in the other jobs before, it's like 90, but they can call you at any point, anytime. There's some jobs where part of your contract is you're not allowed to be in a place that doesn't have cell phone service.
Whoa.
And if you do, you need to bring like a Starlink phone or whatever, so super bat phone. That's like part of the contract is like you cannot be out of service range ever. So I think the first pebble, or the first it's like, I don't know, maybe I'm wealthy on paper, but I don't own my time. So that was the first one. But I think the second one was that the culture that I was in was very much to win, you need to tear someone down.
Mm.
And that's not like, I refuse to let myself. So I always say on Wall Street, I always had my head on a swivel. So like I was a really nice guy, but like you
Mhm.
try to take me down, I will fucking fight you back. Like you're not taking me down just because I'm nice.
Mhm.
But at the same time, I wouldn't tear anyone down. So it was this like weird place to exist. And it just didn't make me comfortable that like the starting premise is tear others down to succeed. So I didn't like that part.
I can see that. I can see why that might be the case.
But a lot of people don't mind it. Um, but I think that, I think that there was something, I think this is where the creativity did stand out and the curiosity did stand out is, I just like, I love to tinker and I just love trying stuff. And I was just tinkering and I love the internet. I mean, the whole Instagram bromance that we had, I love the internet and I was always tinkering, trying stuff out. This is pre-Facebook era, so this kind of blogging era of the internet. And I was just I love trying stuff out on the internet. I was just always fascinated by the internet.
Mhm.
And that tinkering mindset was like, man, why can't I tinker all day? Like, why is my tinkering limited to pre 7 a.m. and post 7 p.m. and the weekends? Right? Like, could I design a life for myself where tinkering is the raison d'être, so to speak? And I think that was probably the ultimate lever. And then there's a very pragmatic thing is like when you have a child, the passage of time becomes crystal clear. Like, oh,
Mm.
it's Soraya's first birthday. Oh my God. I remember holding her in the hospital. It's been a year since that. Oh, it's her second birthday. Oh wow. I remember her first birthday. Like that was a
Mm.
party where the parents got drunk. And now the second birthday, we actually have to do stuff with the kid. So like the passage of time becomes so
Mm.
crystal clear when you have a kid. Whereas like 25 to 34, which is like, it's like a giant blur. Like it's like all I know is I went to a lot of weddings.
So you said that you still found yourself working kind of 60-hour weeks, even kind of when you were working on Rad Reads and working on your own thing. Whereas now it sounds like you're much more loose or just much more flexible. What do you think shifted between those two versions of yourself?
Yeah, I think a lot of when I became an entrepreneur, and I wonder if you experience this too, it's scary. And I think that there's a reason why people don't leave Wall Street is, when you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars a year, seven figures, like it's hard to go to an eat what you kill mindset,
Eat what you
right?
kill.
So,
Never heard
cash
that phrase.
flow is in the early days of entrepreneurship, cash flow it's low and lumpy,
Hmm.
right? It's kind of the opposite of Wall Street, which is fat and steady, right?
Hmm.
And so I think at the beginning, I just had this like deep insecurity slash fear. I don't know if I can cut this. I don't know if I'm cut out for this. I don't know if I made the wrong decision. And I think that in these early days, my initial response to anything that felt threatening was to like outwork the problem.
Mm.
So I remember once someone talked shit about me, someone who I respected talked shit about me, and it got back to me. And I was really angry and upset, but mostly I was just hurt. And I was like, I need to prove to this person that I can do it. And so, you know what I did? I immediately did 100 burpees. That's how maniacal it was. Cause it was like, if I can prove to myself that I can do hard things and like hard things being like 100 burpees on command, then I can do hard things, which is like so fucking broken in so many ways. And there's so much hurt and fear wrapped into all that and pain. But I think that the early days, I'd say, I mean, I've been an entrepreneur for 8.5 years now. We can talk about the different seasons, but
Hmm.
I mean, I've felt some version of that for a good 7 years
Mm.
and like different levels of intensity. I wasn't doing 100 burpees when I missed my sales numbers for SYP, our online course. Um, but but to answer your question, I think that for a very long time, if there's something challenging, if there's something that scares you, if there's uncertainty, if there's something that's out of your control, the answer is always to work harder.
I mean, in some cases, that's a pretty good strategy, right? Like, in what way did that not end up uh, working?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think, well, work harder can also be confused for a lot of things. So I remember in those early days, work harder often meant like read more books about entrepreneurship. So, what we would call $100 work, like
Mhm.
things that feel like faux, French faux, FAUX productivity.
Mhm.
So I think that there was that, some element of work harder was more consumption, which is not always the right thing. But I think that part of the problem with the work harder mindset is that, and this is something that you can put much better words to than I can, but you're living in a constant fight or flight. And there's a huge cost physically, creatively, emotionally, relationship wise, compassionately. There's a huge cost
Yeah.
to always being in the fight or flight mode.
Mhm.
And I think that is the challenge. The thing. So there was that. I think for me, one of the bigger, an equally as big challenge is that kind of ego was wrapped into all of that sense of self, sense of
Mhm.
self-worth.
Mhm.
So when the guy talks shit behind my back, it's an attack to my self-worth and to my ego. And so I'm fighting back. I'm fighting this dragon, but it's like some dude just made some passing comment, right? So it's just like this, the ego channels this ferocious energy and then like misdirects it to like 100 burpees
Burpees.
where, and so I think that there's just so much of that
Mhm.
happening in so many different permutations
Yeah.
and so many different manifestations that it was very cloudy. But I think to my credit that I was getting coached a lot. And I never had a coach until I became an entrepreneur. I
Mm.
never really been introspective in the even in the way I would define it.
Mhm. And
And so I had coaches.
you worked with Andrew Taggart as well, right? If I
I worked for Andrew
remember.
Taggart for many, many years,
Uh-huh.
but even a few coaches before him. And so even as that was happening, there were people around me that were like, okay, you realize that 100 burpees does not solve your entrepreneurship problems. Like, in the most loving and earnest and caring way, they would say that. And so I think that, in finance, they talk about volatility. So if it's like really high highs and really low lows, and you're kind of moving to some direction. I think that as the years went by, I still had that volatility, but it just, the highs weren't as high and the lows weren't as low.
Mhm.
And then I think that was really like the journey that I was on. And plus, other realizations and other motivations that we may or may not talk about.
Mm. Yeah. Well, one of the things that we talked a fair bit about in LA was around money.
Hmm.
And I'm wondering, kind of through this lens of like how to win at the game of life, how might you say that your relationship to money, let's say money and wealth, has
Hmm.
shifted over the last decade or so?
Yeah. It's hard, man. I feel like I'm always trying to measure something,
Hmm.
right? And so I give you an example. Like, I mean, obviously like bank accounts and things like that, stock market portfolios, things like that. But even like more harm, like I wake up in the morning and I meditate almost immediately. And then I'm like borderline type 2 diabetes on the mend though. And then right after I meditate, I'll go prick my finger to measure my blood glucose level. And there's something like really satisfying about that calculation, about the number that it spits out.
Mm.
So if it spits out anything below 100, I feel really good about myself. Like, yeah, you're on the right track and, all these things you're doing. If it spits out a number over 100, which is quite rare these days, but in the past there were a lot of numbers over 100, then it's like, oh, what it's probably because you ate those pistachios before bed, or you drank, that drink was not that margarita wasn't skinny, you know. But now that it's almost like I need to see that number. It's like there's safety in seeing that number, but I think it's a very false sense of safety, right? And I think that it's almost there's like a clinging to it. It's like there's a clinging to feeling special, or there's a clinging to needing to fix something, but it's very difficult to not have either. There's like, it's almost like Pema Chodron uses the word groundlessness.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, it's so absurd because now I'm on the right side of the trade. I've right-sized my blood sugar. So it's always a good number. Yet it's like a little, Andrew, my coach, he called it, it's like a micro orgasm. It's just like this little tiny jolt of like feeling good for a second.
Uh-huh.
And so I'm like, it's like I crave this micro orgasm. And so I could see the title of this podcast, like surfing, money, and micro orgasms. But it's like, why do I, and that's like such a harmless thing, especially because I'm on the right side of the trade. But even when I'm on the wrong side of the trade, I still wanted to see the bad number because I wanted to have something to fix. It's just like, can't you just be like, why do you look it's so inconsequential, this number, but you look so forward to it, like with the intensity of a micro orgasm. And so money is like that times 1,000, right? Because the stakes feel higher, the numbers are bigger, not many people are playing the blood glucose game, but but maybe in Boulder and LA, enough are. Sometimes Lisa gets competitive. She's like, what was your number? It's like, because the goal is not to have the lowest number either, because then you're anemic or something. So money is that finger prick times 1,000 on a global level,
Yeah.
with so much more history and so much. And so there is this, and people, especially people that are in the world of money, entrepreneurs and finance people, it's like what's your net worth, right? And like no one talks about it explicitly because it's kind of uncouth to ask someone but everyone's kind of, especially in finance, is like they've like bucketed people, like, oh, like that's an 8-figure guy, or that's a 6-figure guy, that's a 7-figure guy. And there's all this like very coded language, like, oh, he works on the sell side. It's like the most that they can make is, $1 million. Like, oh, he's a portfolio manager. It's like, oh, like that's a $5 million person, oh, how many homes do they have, right? So it's all, so that the game, right? And so we started earlier, it's like, oh, playing that game is very addictive, and there's this, you get a lot of dopamine, a lot of micro orgasms, maybe macro orgasms from winning the net worth game. But the challenge for me was I opted out of that game. So there's no way that I could, it's very hard to win that game when you're not, it's like bringing a gun to a knife, bringing a knife to a gunfight, right? It's like, good luck. And so I have rambled a bit, but I think that the way, if I remember the question correctly, it's like, how did that all show up? It's all encompassing, right? And it's like everything can be viewed through this lens of like, how much money does this person have? How much money does this person make? Which then translates into, how good are they? How special are they? How important are they? And it's very exhausting, and it's also very hard to escape. And again, that's where I go back to the diabetes pinprick. I'm like, if you get a high off of that, imagine the high you get off this other game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I really appreciate how open you are around talking about this stuff. I think I mean, money and sex are two of the most taboo topics, I think, in our culture in some ways, and that there's
Mm.
so much shadow there. And something that I'm interested in is like people's their relationship to money, but specifically like their money stories. Like, do
Hmm.
you feel like there was a certain story where money equated, you know, for some people it's safety, for some people it's
Yeah.
like security, for some people it's like attention or
Yeah.
success, which means validation. Do you think that as the number went up, do you think there was like something in you that was being fed in that way?
I think so. That's a wonderful question. I think for me that the it started with safety, and we grew up kind of lower middle class, and people have heard me on podcasts. Like I was mugged, multiple times growing up as a kid, and I was scared to walk to school, even though we lived in a very middle class neighborhood, Stuyvesant Town in New York City, for those who are familiar. But New York in the 90s, like it was just pretty common to like go see your car and it was burnt, like, or, like kids would get mugged on the way to school. And that was just part of being a kid in New York. Like, I mean, it almost transcends like kids on the Upper West Side going to, $50,000 private schools would get mugged on the way to school as well. So it wasn't like a socioeconomic thing. So safety was definitely one. And if I had to parse it through, I have not gone on this exploration, but my dad is a genocide survivor, and that's kind of a part of our family history that we don't really talk about. And so again, I don't really know if and how that's impacted me, but I'm sure that there are imprints of that. I mean, definitely on my dad and thus on me. I don't really know though. But I'd say initially safety. And I think that the thing that I realized, this is, again, it's nice to get interviewed by your friends because you can kind of like put more color on different statements. But I think one thing I realized recently is that I care a lot about being famous, and not famous in the Mr. Beast type way or Leonardo DiCaprio type way or Kelly Slater type way, but like famous in like our bubble or my bubble, maybe your adjacent bubble, but like a Morgan Housel way or a Ramit Sethi way or
Mm.
a James Clear kind of way. But I also know that whatever insecurity I feel today, if I have James Clear level of fame, I will feel the exact same level of insecurity. Like I've had enough. This will sound arrogant, but I've had enough successful moments in my life to know that the thing that the success didn't heal the inner pain. I know I'm 150% convinced of that. There's no amount of success that will heal whatever insecurities that I have, which we've talked about some, and I'm happy to share them all. So, but there's something about, so I think that the money game to me has almost evolved into a fame and notoriety game and I do think it's ultimately driven by the need to feel validated, which is at its core a fear of my own unlovability. And I remember when I was a kid, I was like, no woman will ever love me. Like I just felt that at my core. And I don't know why. Like it's not like something traumatic happened to. I just, I think that there was partially the immigrant, like outsider mindset. I think my parents were just like, don't think about girls. And then I think that, I was relegated to the friend zone, quite young. And it was just very insecure. And so I remember, I think I've said this on a podcast once, but I think I've rarely said this. I remember once going through this whole exercise in my head. I was like, well, if no one will marry me, like, could I adopt a kid as a single male so that I could have a family?
Oh,
And I thought about this. I was probably in
oh.
my 20 or like
Mm,
16 to 18 when I thought about this.
mhm,
And then I told a friend this like when I was maybe 20. And then I was starting to date women and my confidence grew a lot. And my friend's like, no, like single straight men just can't like go adopt kids. It's like they're so low on the pecking order of like who can. So that good thing I didn't hear that at 16. But I do think that, yeah, man, I was just really scared of that I just be alone my whole life. And I think it's hard for people who know me, who met me later in life, to be like, that's so incongruous to how you show up now. I mean, like you can't turn a social media channel without seeing some fucking video of me. It's like that's kind of like but I think that like it's actually not incongruous. It's actually the other side of the coin, right?
Totally.
Of that. And I wonder that, it's like I have a very loving relationship with, the really important people in my life. I have a great group of friends. But so why do I care about if my fear is unlovability and I believe that fame and validation will bring me love, like, but I have love. So I think like
Hmm.
something feels like wrong, like
Hmm.
tricky there or inconsistent, incoherent.
Hmm.
And actually, that's when I turned to you at that retreat in LA. And I said to you, I was like, I think that whatever I'm feeling through all this, words are no longer helpful because
Mm.
I could write the logical case of I think I just pretty much described it. Very rational, like the dots kind of connect until they don't,
Mm.
which is why do you feel this way? Um, and I've done a lot of coaching and talk style therapy, and I do feel like I don't think the breakthrough to heal whatever is still hurting here is going to
Mm.
come from more talking or more reading books.
Yeah, man, I really appreciate you sharing that. And in many ways, I feel like a parallel with my journey as well. There were
Mm,
like many, say most of my years at school, I felt this deep sense of aloneness and this sense of kind of isolation. And I think, you know, 10 years later, kind of traveling and attempting to become, let's say, as interesting as possible in order to maybe mitigate that from being the case. Like, you know, starting a podcast called Curious Humans, you know, traveling, all these things. And a couple of weeks ago, actually, my friend guided me through a somatic journey where I almost like regressed in age and went back to like a much younger version of me and felt this sense of like existential aloneness that I think I experienced in that age. And yeah, it was very moving and interesting that like in some ways, you know, I love what has come from that, but I think in many ways that was the seed of what has now been like this creative force. And I think honestly, I think that's true for many people that the specific way in which they're wounded by life, usually in their early years, then becomes the kind of the way in which they give their gift or they share their creative gifts with other people.
can I ask you some of this, like a lot of, like as I hear myself talk, there's a lot of, like, there's a shame in it. And the
Hmm.
shame is that, like, dude, your parents loved you. You were middle class. No one ever laid a finger on you.
Hmm.
Yeah, you got mugged a few times on your walk to school, but that was New York in the 90s.
Hmm.
And like it's almost like who are you to be having these problems, right? I
Mm.
think there's like this inner voice. And I remember reading in a book recently, like a child's pain is a child's pain irrespective of their socioeconomic standing.
Right, right, totally.
And but at the same time, and maybe there's this kind of more Gen Xy version of me that's like, dude, like your problems aren't that bad. Like,
Mm.
suck it up, buttercup, type mindset.
Right, right. I mean, my sense or like my perspective on that is that the way that I mean, this is probably a bigger conversation around privilege, but I think that there are very important needs that we have as children and as adults around being seen and witnessed and being met emotionally. And if those and which then connect to a sense of like felt sense of safety that we feel. And if those aren't met, then it doesn't matter. Like you could have your parents could be millionaires, you could have like all of the friends on the outside, but if you're not being seen and held and kind of acknowledged in whatever experience you're having, and you're making some experience wrong, then that will create that sense of internal pain, essentially. And yeah, it's not the same as like a kind of typical single event trauma where someone is abused or there's physical violence, where it's very easy to point to. But I think on an emotional level, we experience it as the same, and so we still carry that around with us.
Thank you. Yeah, that's. I feel like I don't know. I don't feel like there's many people I could have this type of conversation with. So I thank you for A, for providing the space, and B, for always being so, so thoughtful about these types
Oh,
of topics.
no, I mean, as I mentioned, I really appreciate your and I felt this when we were together in LA. There's this like sense of like directness and willingness to share whatever's true and like alive and real for you. And that's like, I think it really creates a sense of trust. And I imagine it's why, 50,000 people plus like trust you, because there is this sense of like honesty about your experience, and you don't kind of hide, even if there are still stories around like you want to like make more money than the people that you worked with in Wall Street. You're just like honest about that. And I think
Mhm.
that's relieving, and
Oh,
almost like gives other people permission to share or feel whatever they're afraid to say.
thank you. Thank you for saying that. Because I think I think that this is a small tangent, but I think there's a whole group of people on the internet that are the exact opposite of this. And when I watch them, grow a 50,000 person email list in 8 months when it took me 8 years, I'm like, fuck these motherfuckers. And
There's AI newsletters.
yeah, I need to reground myself. That is like, again, it's like, what is, it kind of comes full circle. What is the game, right? And I do think the game at this point is just like, it's earnestness. It's, no, like truth telling. And really, now I'm going to throw a bunch of woo words out, but it's just a genuine love, right? Just a love for other humans, a love and admiration for everyone's stories, and what conversations can ensue. I think that's what motivates me, is like when you were there when I was like, yeah, I have all these issues with like talking about, I feel uncomfortable talking about how much money I made or I have. I feel like it invalidates different things that I've done. And there's so much shame in that. And people are going to troll me and all that. And the resounding message was just put it like, that's your path right there, is to kind of walk into that and walk through that.
Mm.
And just like when I actually released the episode, it was just like the craziest response in like super tactical ways. Like there was one, like CNBC had an article, but they didn't want to release it because I wouldn't tell them how much money I had made. And
Mm.
so once I said to the world, like, okay, this is how
Mm.
much money I made in my best year, I was
Mm.
like, here's the podcast, go nuts. They release it. Of course, they take the number and they put in the headline, and it went viral. It went
Oh
fucking
wow.
viral. And so, but
Uh-huh.
that's like almost, that's like the funny one. But the deeper one, and I was on a podcast earlier, deeper one, and this is like, I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about this. But from anytime there's a press story, 3 to 5 Cambodian Americans reach out to me, and there's a term for elders that's like brother. It's bong, like BONG.
Mhm.
And so they email me, even though I'm not particularly connected to my Cambodian heritage. They email me and they're like, hey, Bong K, it was so great to see other Cambodian American role models,
Mm.
leading the trail. And I'm like,
Mm.
every year, a couple publications will write about me. There'll be this huge virality traffic surge. And then 2 to 5 Cambodians will reach out. And then
Mm.
we maintain the friendship from that. It's just like, so now I'm like, I feel like I've hit a point in my like life where I'm like, that's worth so much more to me than the marginal X dollar.
Mm.
and the X likes or retweets or all that. And so I feel very lucky. I had to I'm still working through all of the, the attachments that I have to different metrics and numbers and what my blood sugar is every morning. But I feel very, very, when those things happen, I'm like, this is where the juice is at.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. One of the things I was going through some of your blog posts before this conversation, and you wrote, "I only do things that make me come alive." I think this was from one of the recent posts, and I'm wondering what does that mean for you, and how do you again, it feels like a big shift to kind of having aliveness be like the North Star from. In the beginning, maybe it was money, and then it was kind of building a list and success in the entrepreneurship. And now it feels like it's like aliveness is the thing that maybe it's like the new way to, like the infinite game of life, like the game that keeps on playing.
Yeah. It was a shift. And I think honestly we keep talking about this magical retreat because it was magical in LA. I think that the starting point, the opposite of aliveness is feeling dead inside. So, so it's if you look at it that way, it's pretty basic. But yeah, I've been reading. I don't know how to pronounce his name. It's Thich Nhat
Hanh.
Thich Nhat Hanh. I was reading Being Peace by him, and one of the first paragraphs is about meditation, and he's like, "You should try to smile during meditation." And he's like, because if you smile during meditation, I'm paraphrasing, you will smile when you're not meditating. And there was this part of me that's like, you can't just tell people to smile. Or what if your natural state is smiliness, right? It's almost like two different, I know it's like two different sides of a coin, but there are definitely people whose natural states are smiliness. And I think his argument is that, you have to embody smiliness and then you smile all the time, during meditation in real life. But I thought it was just this interesting, it was just so pithy and basic, but it was also like, yeah, like, why can't you smile like all the time? It's like, oh, but I had a bad quarter, or my kid won't eat their dinner, or my bald spot's getting worse. Like, why can't you smile all the time? And I think that. So I just use that as a useful frame. It's like, imagine a world where you're resting, there's like resting bitch face, and it's like there's resting smile face. Imagine a world where resting smile face is just the norm. And it doesn't seem it doesn't seem like a crazy idea. So to go back to the aliveness, I mean, I think I had to let go of the pursuit of money as a singular goal and the pursuit of fame as a singular goal. Because in earnest, and to be honest, those were the ones that felt the least alive. And so I don't have to even tell you about the bazillion, social media engagement tricks that they tell you to grow your following, to go viral, to whatever. And I would just sit down and be like, 8 productivity books you should read before you die. Like, fuck this. Like, fuck this. And I know that it will hit because I've done it so many times. And I think it reached this point where I was almost like physically incapable of doing it. And then simultaneously, the aliveness kind of bled into other things. And things started to emerge very, dare I say, naturally, right? Or intrinsically. Like just the other day, I like felt this like really strong compulsion to make a TikTok. And I wasn't attached to how many views. I have no followers on TikTok. I've not once been viral on TikTok, despite trying very hard. I hired a consultant on TikTok, and he was awesome. It was me. I was like, I terminated the thing early. I'm just like, I can't do this. Like, this is so painful. But I felt this calling to make a TikTok, and so I made it. And whatever, like it did what all the others do. It has like 1,000 views, which is nothing in TikTok land. A bunch of people commented on it, but I was like, that was nice. And so I think that the aliveness, what it made me realize was that there were many, I call them containers. So there's like a social media container. If you want to be a creator or an influencer or whatever, there's another monetization container, right? And there's different containers, and it's like, this is how you make money. This is how you do social media. This is how this type of person writes a book. And what I realized was the traditional containers, as they were set forth, presented, were very unappealing to me. And so in my mind, maybe it's a failure of my own imagination, but I felt like a lot of the podcasts that were out there, everyone was like, hey, start a podcast. Actually, let's do a YouTube channel, because that's one that's like very salient these days. And from our LA trip, Khe started a YouTube channel. And so, of course, you go to YouTube and it's like thumbnail, 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 editing, and all that. But I started to put my solo episodes of my podcast on YouTube, and they are my best performing videos outside of some like old productivity videos. And it's literally me talking in front of the camera for an hour with no editing. And so it kind of, this little alarm bell went off. It's like, when you resist the container by pursuing aliveness, there's this oomph, or I felt the urge to say pizzazz. There's this pizzazz factor that just shows up. And sometimes it's going to work, sometimes it's not going to work, but it doesn't matter because you showed up with your aliveness. Right. So it's almost like I often have to think about it in quantitative terms. It's like, well, if I'm following aliveness, even if nothing happens, it doesn't matter, because the whole point was just to be alive, if it's a 1-minute exercise or a 60-minute exercise. So I will never regret 60 minutes of aliveness. And so if 1,000 people watch the video, that's just bonus. And then what happens when you follow the aliveness is you start to see that the containers are, it's kind of like what the Buddhists would call forms, right? It's just like things that you try to express with words or tangible objects of reality, but it's really not that simple, right? And so from that emerges this playfulness and this curiosity and this joy and this lightness that then makes the aliveness even more present, which then kind of filters into all of the creative acts. Now, huge disclaimer. Ever since I implemented this philosophy, I haven't made much money. So please take everything I'm saying with a grain of salt. I don't know if what I've just described is the key to money, to monetization or making money, but I am making money. It's not the most I've ever made. It's not the lowest I've ever made, but I do. Yeah. So I'll stop there. That was a long rant.
That was great. And I feel like I just had this image of like a wearable that you could wake up in the morning and be like, Khe spent 8 hours yesterday in full aliveness, like, and this way of, but I mean, it sounds like, coming back to the beginning of this conversation around like playing the game of life, it sounds like, I mean, as long as you have enough money to have your needs met and you're not in a place of like legitimate scarcity, then perhaps that strategy, makes the most sense.
I think so. I think this will be the next. I think I'm so angry. There's
I
a
felt like
part of
resistance in you as you said. There was this like.
Yeah. Well, I think. I mean, I think it's still like the old script that, like, I think that intellectually, I believe that like the truest surrender to this will be the best life for me and my family. But I think intellectually, there's still like a few shackles on different parts of my body that are just like, yeah, but give yourself 3 months to figure that out, or let's talk. But I think that I think the beauty of this is that you really, truly, and I feel like you're one of the few people that can really appreciate this, is that you really start to see the world in a completely different way. It's kind of like the, red pilling type stuff, where you're like, no, this is real, and this is how it's meant to be. And then when you meet people who think you're batshit crazy, you're just like, that's it. You are inhabiting a different reality, and I respect that reality because I lived in that reality for many, many years myself. So I think that there is, I don't, yeah, I'd be lying if I'm just like, oh, this is the way I'm going to live for the rest of my life. Like I don't have the confidence in it, but it feels so much, there's a lot less resistance to it all. And with the decline in resistance, that's the other thing. It's to use like nerdy fucking Twitter boy language, thread boy language. There's a lot of Lindy in this. It's like every day that you live it, you just kind of like, oh yeah, like I'm still here. I'm still paying my rent. I'm still thriving. And so I think it's very Lindy in that regard.
Yeah, it's like it creates more evidence that kind of reinforces the story that it's okay and that it's working and that you can keep going in this way. And in some ways, I mean, it feels like the rules of this game are to kind of seek out and find the ways in which we're like giving away our aliveness, in which we're not setting boundaries, or we're doing stuff that feels like we have to endure it. And then that becomes a self-reinforcing loop, because when you notice it, you hopefully find a way to feel something or change it, and then like more aliveness appears. And so it feels like it's becoming like another, you can certainly view it as a game to play, I think, and with very real like feedback loops and rewards.
Yeah. And I was thinking back to that resistance. I think that there's kind of this overpowering skeptical voice somewhere inside of me that's like, the volume of that voice used to be a 10 and now it's maybe like a 2. But that voice is, okay, do you really think you could spend the rest of your time on this earth chasing aliveness? That's what the voice is saying. It's like, do you really believe that that's possible? And like I said, the voice is at a 2, so it's not scary. It's more just skeptical. Like I think at a 10, it's like outright scary. That's like 100 burpees level scary. And at a 2, it's just like, you're just kind of, you're just a little tight. I'm a little tight right now for those of you who are not seeing this on video.
Yeah, I love that. So I have a few rapid fire questions that I wanted to run by you, and then I think we'll wrap this thing up. So question number 1, very much in theme with what we've been talking about. What is your current definition of wealth?
I'd say being present. And I know that this could easily turn into an Eckhart Tolle cliche, but I really believe that you could have all the money in the world, and if you're not present, what's the point? You could have all the free time in the world, but if you're not present, what's the point? But the thing that really moved me about presence is this realization. I think it was Sam Harris that pointed it out. He said, it was on the Chris Williamson interview. He said, if you're not present, or if there's any hindrance on your presence, you are not giving your fullest love to the people you care the most about. Think about it, right? If your daughter comes home or your puppy greets you at the door and you're thinking about the 9 emails you have yet to send, which is me all the time, you can't fully love that person while you're thinking about those 9 emails. And it doesn't matter how much fucking money you have, and it doesn't matter how much fucking free time you have, because you're going to think about something that's going to take you away from the people that you love most.
Man, that's brutal. I can almost hear the sound of people downloading the Waking Up app as we're speaking.
Shout out Sam and Chris. What a phenomenal episode. Phenomenal.
Yeah,
Skip the first 45 minutes on Trump and then get into the like meditation stuff.
Beautifully filmed as well. Very, very nice. Very nicely filmed. Wow. Well, that was a mic drop moment. Question number two: what is one concept that has improved your own sense of aliveness?
I think noticing reactivity. And what I mean by that is, you know, we all have those friends, even our partners, where you want to just give them a little poke just because, like a told you so or a gotcha or I know something that you don't know. And and that's like not in conflict. And so when you're in conflict in an argument or disagreeing with someone, I think that paying attention to my reactivity is, or did you ask what a practice was?
Concept, idea, or
Concept,
practice? Yeah.
practice. So noticing that reactivity, because usually the reactivity is actually not about the other person. It's about me. And using that like micro moment to just what are you trying to like when you're trying to just told you so to your partner, like what's what's really happening there?
Mm.
And again, I think I've done this enough times that oftentimes like words can't answer it. So then I'll thanks to you, actually, you and a few other teachers, I'll just kind of drop into like breathing or into my body and be like, okay, like where am I feeling this right now? But you notice cutting someone off, someone cuts you off, you want to yell, like, put aside politics, but even like when someone's political views anger you, like what's behind that reactivity and really exploring that. Because usually there's a lot on the other side of it. There's a lot of that, the wounds, the hurt and the sadness.
Yeah, wow. And for listeners wondering, that wasn't a paid promotion of nervous system mastery. That was, but needless to say, I very much resonate with that too. What is something that you're wrestling with in your own life right now, or what is an edge for you?
I think I have my obsessive personality, as demonstrated by, burpee challenges, burpee reactive, right? When your reactivity is 100 burpees, you got some serious introspection to do. I think that I recently like took a break from alcohol. I've been a pretty heavy drinker for most of my life, adult life, teenage life, and immediately all of that energy was channeled into fitness. And all things considered, that's a good trade. But there's more to that story that needs to be unpacked, right? And I don't know exactly. I suspect it's tied into all of the different things that we've talked about, right? Like needing to measure something and the voice inside of you that's, do you really think aliveness is going to be your guiding light for the rest of your life? That's a 2 out of 10. I suspect that they're all, and the scared child in New York City that gets mugged, scared to walk to school, and that's also afraid that no woman will ever love them, and they'll have to adopt kids on their own. So I assume that it's related. They're all fucking related. Let's be honest. But I do like this need to. It's fine. Like when I used to drink a lot, I would drink and then I would like, okay, I'm going to stop drinking, and I'd be buzzed or even drunk, and I'd be like, what's the next thing that could satisfy this like craving that I have? I would start working. So I
Hmm.
would drink to stop thinking about work, and once I hit my limit on drinking, I would satiate myself with more work. And then if I got really bored, then, I would like go eat some ice cream or something. So it's just like, it's like the micro orgasm context. So I do think I'm a little bit away from the question, but I do think that, you know, needing to channel so much intensity into something kind of constantly
Hmm.
is something I wouldn't say I'm struggling with, but I am observing, because I don't think it's purely it's purely healthy. I don't think that the underlying currents are purely healthy.
Thank you. And last question. If you died surfing tomorrow, what might you want written on your gravestone?
I would say his daughters and wife and friends loved when he was around. Loved having him around. I was wrestling with something like, oh, he helped people, he helped people deepen their self-awareness. But I think that was actually, as I thought through it, I'm like, I think that's what I'm supposed to say.
Hmm.
But what I really wanted to say is just like this like group of people loved having him around.
He was present. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, it's been so much fun. Where's the best place for listeners to learn more about the world of Khe? You have an amazing podcast, which I will give a shout out to. You have an amazing newsletter, which I've been subscribed to since before newsletters were even a thing.
Tiny letter days.
Yeah, right. I had one of those. Where would you like to direct people to?
Yeah, so thank you. This has been awesome. That's like pure aliveness every single hour, 71 minutes of this conversation. And thank you, listeners, as well. Radreads.co, sign up for a newsletter. That's kind of the hub for everything. Pretty active on Twitter, but that's slowly been fading. So Twitter is where I used to be the most active, and then Instagram and TikTok. Instagram is probably next, and then I'm playing around with TikTok and YouTube.
Everyone follow Khe on TikTok. I'm gonna highlight that link in there.
Get me to 1,000 so I can put my link in bio. I'm at 423.
Khe's Aliveness isn't TikTok, so amazing. Well, I'd like to close with this line from Rilke. He said, "Try to love the questions themselves and live them now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live your way into the answer." And with that in mind, what is one question that is alive in your consciousness right now? And what is one question that you might leave our listeners with?
So it's funny, we've been talking a lot about games. And so in my consciousness, there's, Andrew Taggart, he would always say, what's beyond games? So that one is, I feel like that's like a black belt question, and I'm still a blue belt. So it still feels far away, but I see it. I honor it. And then a more tactical question, I think this has been more around, alcohol consumption is, what am I unwilling to feel right now?
That's a beautiful question from Tara Brock.
Yeah.
That will give you a lot of mileage right there. Yeah, the first question feels almost like a koan. It's like you sit with it long enough and it'll like break your brain in a certain way and you'll experience enlightenment. Well, man, thank you so much. This has been such fun. I'm so glad we finally did this. And get some waves for me while I'm landlocked in Boulder.
Sounds good. Thank you, Johnny. Thanks, everyone. This was awesome.